I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
The Second World War from 1939 to 1945 dramatically changed the lives of the people of Britain, including the children. Can you imagine what it was like to be a child during the Second World War?
My name's Elizabeth Bell and I was born 1931 at Hendon, Norman Street, and later we moved to Ford Estate. New Estate. I remember very well the day war was declared was a Sunday, 11 o'clock. We were chased into the kitchen so parents could listen to the news, and we thought it was funny, and my younger brother got a clip for laughing. But we didn't know war was serious at the time. We knew nothing about a war.
My name is Jim Kent, and I was born in April 1933, so I was just about 6.5 the day war broke out.
Can you remember anything about that day, Jim?
Not a lot. So I was only 6.5. I expect my parents listened to the announcement on the radio. I think it was a fine day, but the thing I remember most about it was the air raid warning sirens went off, because we had one just over the road to us. And that was the first time I remember hearing them, although they may well have tested them when they first put them up. But I do remember that.
I'm Margaret Taylor. I was born in 1935. I was 4 when the war started and 9 when it finished. I can remember sitting on a brass table in our living room up at St Aidan's estate where I lived, and my mother was putting my shoes and socks on, the wireless was on, and it must have been announced that there was going to be a war. She was rather nervous because she'd been through the First World War and actually worked on the munition factories and saw the soldiers coming in and out at Newcastle Station and the wounded, so she had a little bit idea what was going to happen, and that transferred onto me because she just cried and gave me a hug and said, I wonder what's going to happen to all you children. This is going to be a dreadful time. So I do remember that.
At the beginning of the war, the schools were closed. It was figured that they would be bombed, because from the air, the schools could easily be confused with factories.
Yes, the schools were closed really over the winter of 1939-40. I can't remember how long, but it was quite a few weeks. A lady near us who was a school teacher started a little school where about, I suppose, 10 of us, I knew the people who went, we had to go to school. And it was fun really. I think we went morning and afternoon. And it was a very snowy winter that, because I can remember going through the deep snow. And it probably lasted, I don't know, possibly 6 months.
Well, for the first 6 months we didn't have to go to school, which was wrong wild. I think it was when the school started up again, I remember the teacher coming round the estate. Well went round that, just coming reporting that we already had to report back to school. And quite a few of us done a run up the little woods, never thinking that couldn't stay there all the time. But then we eventually went back to school.
Pallian School, Waverley Terrace was where I went, and if there'd been a bomb, a raid the night before, we got to school, it was closed because people that had been bombed out were using the school. So we went away like and to have a look at bomb damage, to collect shrapnel and fill the day in, probably having fights with gas masks as well, which we carried all over on our shoulders. And we also wore identity discs on our wrists. We did with your name on and your identity number. And my number was FDUN 854. Don't think I'll ever forget that number.
Yes, at school, there was blast walls inside the school at Commercial Road. We had gas masks to take, we had cushions that you were told to put your head into if there was any glass came about. We used to have little practices and things like that. I can remember children coming with black armbands on their arms, and you knew then, you didn't say anything at the time to them, you would say to each other, oh, somebody's died in the family, and so you knew that sort of thing. And at school, I think once I can remember a ship down on the Hendon beach. I don't know whether it had been blown up from a mine or just, well, it must have something happened because there was dead bodies on the beach. One of the lads came into the school and told us, and we all sneaked out, probably in the lunch hour, and went down to have a look at this. And of course, there was all barbed wire and things. You couldn't get onto the beach, but we did see these bodies on the beach, and but we were chased away.
And whenever there was sirens sounded, we lined up and walked into the area shelters, great big underground bunkers that were, with a teacher in each place, and the headmaster banged a tin tray with a big spoon to warn us to get into line. Infants went in first, and followed on from that till the older boys, which were 14-year-old, would go in last, We took a gas mask, the inevitable gas mask, strung over our shoulders, and when it poured with the rain, the bottom dropped out of the gas mask case and it fell on the ground, and I think it was all dinted to bits. I don't think we had practices with a gas mask on. I think that's all we were involved with.
Of course, we wandered back very long, and we moved to a place called Plains Farm Estate, up in Humbledon, and we transferred to another school. But I was off school for about 12 months when we went up there, because there was no schools up that area, and finished up going to Bishop Weymouth School, side the Empire, along Paley Street. And of course there they had shelters in the schoolyard, and they used to have soil over the top, and I remember quite well they used to grow vegetable marrows on top of the shelters. Of course, as I say, they were covered with earth,
Another war preparation was to try to move children to safer parts of the country. They were often moved far away from their families. This was called evacuation.
Well, in my case, it was a tremendous upheaval, in as much as we were evacuated, we'd never been away, quite naturally, you've never been away from home before, and we were evacuated to a place called Croft Spa, which is about 5 miles outside of Darlington. And we were there for several months, and it was quite a different, because we were from the town and this was a rural district, and but it was all right while we were there. But we had a brother that fretted, a younger brother, and my mother brought us back home again, and when we got back, quite naturally, the school was all sandbagged and all the rest of it. There was a lot of glass about, and it was lights was on most of the time in the schools.
Well, my mum wasn't very well educated. She'd been caught up in the First World War, and at a very early age she'd been taught to knit balaclavas and socks. So when it come to filling forms in, which really was my dad's position in the family, taking care of any stationery or officialdom, as my mother would call it, I don't think she could cope with the evacuation forms, because there was 5 of us She had 5 children, and I know that my brothers were very keen on going, but I don't think that she could handle the paperwork, and she was, like most people like that, rather proud, and didn't advertise the fact that she couldn't read or write very well. So we weren't evacuated.
I wasn't evacuated. To the best of my knowledge, the younger children, because I was only in infant school, were evacuated. My sister, who was at Bede at the time, she was evacuated for a short while until she left school. But I was not evacuated.
Can't remember anyone from my own particular school, but there's one lad out of the church I called Billy Short. He went on that the evacuation ship, the City of Benares, which got sunk. He went with his brother, and his brother Peter never returned, but Billy was one of the survivors, one of the few survivors. I can remember that quite vividly.
The war brought major changes to family life. Many fathers, uncles and older brothers were called upon to join the armed forces, such as the Navy, the Army and the Air Force.
My dad was called up shortly after the beginning of the war. He ran milk into the town with a milk cart, horse and cart, and it wasn't an occupation that was safe from the war, so he was called up, as well as his 2 brothers already in the war. One was a captain in the artillery, and the other one was a radio engineer for Palmer's.
My sister was in the ATS, and my brother in the latter part of the years was in the Navy. And so I remember my sister coming home on leave and the telegram boy coming up with the telegram, and it was great excitement because she was coming home on leave. And my dad was in the war. He'd been in the First World War as well, but he was invalided out of the war. But he was sent to Coventry in the factories. I suppose that would be his war effort.
The most upsetting thing to me was that my father was going to go away, because I can remember, even though being so young, I can still see him sitting at the table with this paper in his hand, and my mother being a bit upset, and he was saying, well, there's nothing I can do about it, I've got to go. It's calling up papers, I've got to go. And then realising that my dad was going to go away and leave us.
A wounded train used to come along the railway line with wounded on going up to Cherry Knowles Hospital, and it would stop for a while for the points to be changed, and people would go out and give them cigarettes and chat to them. I have some friends called Mary and Jim Martin. They got very friendly with some of the lads from Scotland, and after the war they used to come down quite often to visit them.
As the war carried on, many foreign uniforms could be seen in Sunderland.
I remember the Americans, one particular time, they were walking along by the station, and of course we thought it was great to have these people with chocolate to give away and chewing gum to give away, and they used to shout to them, have you got any gum, chum? And they would give you chewing gum or chocolate if they had it. They were very generous to the children. And I can remember getting some gum down beside the station, and there was 3 of them.
Later on in 1940 there was a lot of foreign Canadians, French, Polish, Australian. The Australian soldiers used to have one side of their hat used to be stood upright.
Sunderland was one of the most heavily bombed towns in Britain.
Well, I remember well the bombs that was dropped in the East End because I was out that night staying at my mother's friend's when the old washhouse was bombed, and it was terrifying noise. I'd getting up out of bed and I was standing at the top of the stairs, and you would just think a big hand just pushed us down. Well, it obviously was the blast.
But I remember quite well the Winter Gardens down by Mowbray Park. Was actually in Mowbray Park. I remember when it went to Journey, and just across the road, as it were, was Bin's store. It went, and of course the main aiming for the shipyards and that, I think, really. But there were several places, got bombed. It was quite a horrific time, like, because people was a bit terrified, like, to say the least.
But previous to that, we'd had a warning on the wireless. This Lord Haw, the traitor, William Joyce, I think you called him, he said they were going to bomb Ford Estate with incendiary bombs because it was only a cardboard estate and it would burn. Well, we seen them coming down and seen the railings catch a fire, and I was rooted to the doorstep. I dared to move to get into the area shelter because there was red hot shrapnel flying all over. You know, when bombs was flying, you could see the searchlights when they got an enemy bomber in them, crossed. And Big Bertha over Hilton, where I live now, you could hear that going off. So it fetched war home to the young ones, that.
We lived in Broome Street, which is where the bus station is in Sunderland now, town centre. And of course Broome Street was more or less on top of the railway and not too far away from the river, the shipyards, etc. So really we were bombing targets.
We lived in Newcastle Road, not far from Thompson Park, and a device landed in Thompson Park in the big field. Fortunately, it didn't go off, otherwise I may not have been here. I suppose where it landed would be 500 metres from where we lived, and we're in the shelter. The windows in the house, the fan lights all blew open. They weren't broken. They just jumped off the bars jumped off, and they all shot open, and we had to move out. I think we were away possibly, certainly one night, possibly 2 nights. We went to an aunt's at Roker. I think it was possibly 2 nights whilst they defused this thing. It left a huge hole because it filled with water.
I'm told that I used to go hysterical when I used to hear the sirens going. I can remember the first time I heard them go, and everybody was chasing around and everybody was really overreacting because everybody was putting their gas masks on, and the wardens were coming round with their hats on and blowing whistles, and there seemed to be a big reaction and sort of a panic the first time they went. And it was a terrible sound, a terrible wailing sound. And every time they used to go, I used to tremble. I can remember being so frightened and trembling with fright.
The only time I know, my mother was a very strong person and never conveyed fear to us, but that was the only time that I felt fear, because the German aeroplane had dropped flares and lit the whole town up. And she said, "Oh my goodness, they've lit it up with flares." And you thought they could pick any of us out. I realised that probably it was the ducks they were looking for.
We were bombed out because there was a direct hit on the railway station, which was just at the bottom of the street where we lived. And the roof, when this all clear had gone and we were able to come out, and the roof had gone and the house was just a mess. Debris all over the place, which was very frightening again, because then we had no home.
When there was big places such as the bin store, when it went up in flames, we could see it with the night sky, we knew there'd been bombs, and we could occasionally see flares, and my grandfather always used to say, "Oh, they're trying for the ducks." We had a horse shot machine gun, and my grandfather and his staff were machine gunned, what we call the Northfields, and they drove into some stooks to protect themselves from the machine guns. I don't think they were doing them a lot of good, but anyway, they all survived.
On the way to church there were lots of huge craters where the bombs had been dropped the night before, and where the civic centre is now there was a huge recreation park, but behind that is Ailey Terrace. They were all big residential houses, and there was lots of bombing there, and you often could hear women screaming for their children, you know, and their family under all this rubble.
The government thought that petrol, clothing and food would be in short supply. Rationing was introduced so that all families had a fair share of what was available, and ration books were issued to every family.
You got no fruit, things like that, because there was none. And we got quite used to dried eggs, egg on toast, and powdered milk. We did, otherwise it affected the adults more than the children.
Oh yes, there was rationing, and of course there was lots of things came on the market which you'd never heard or dreamt of, or, you know, before, and there was to substitute the rations, like, because bananas you could only get them on a green book, you know, and that was for kiddies under 5, that sort of thing, and clothing was coupons, and it affected everybody, not just my family, every family, literally in the land, like, you know, and.
Yeah, bananas was one. I mean, I was fascinated. What was a banana? I used to ask Mum, what was a banana? What did it taste like? What did it look like? And I remember headlines in the paper one time, some child had been very ill and had specially got a banana, so I wasn't the only one that wanted to know what a banana was like.
I still have one ration book. If there was a baby in the family and you had a green ration book, everybody else had a blue one. You were able to buy fruit, but you could never get any fruit because there was, I think there was a well-known fruit called Gailey's in the town, and the word would come out there were fruit, and it would fly down in the queue and be right outside, you know, for miles up the road, and then as you got near the door of the fruiters, they would say, well, all sold out. So we never saw any fruit at all. Of only at Christmas time. I don't know how my mum managed to get it for Christmas time, apple and orange in your stocking.
Parents then, they used to do a lot of cooking. They used to make their own cakes. I know my mother was an expert in making sponge cakes, and that was a particular thing, but it was mostly basic food. Everybody was no different from the war. In fact, I should imagine it was more healthier food because you couldn't have biscuits or cream cakes or things like that.
And I remember just after the war, my mum saying she was out with a friend with her baby, and somebody a toddler handed the child a banana, and she looked at it and gave it back and said, "Boil it, mummy." She didn't realise, you know, the fruit was inside the skin.
After 6 long years, the war in Europe ended when Germany surrendered in May 1945.
I think I must have been about 9, and I can remember that day when the war ended, because everybody was flying through the town, and Bishop Weymouth Church was all lit up that night, and Mowbray Park, people dancing all over the place, you know, in the parks and everything, and we as children. Nowadays you wouldn't let your children go out like that, but you could wander anywhere, and we were just flying all over the town, my friends and I, you know, at the jubilation of the war ending.
I can remember the parties in the street in the local estate, and all the kids there, their parents had all baked for them, and there was the tables and the chairs out and the tables set, and I was up there seeing all my mates sit down for their meals and came home. I didn't join in. I was told later on I should have, but I thought I had no right because it wasn't my family that was setting the tables.
There was just this atmosphere of cheering. I think all the bells rang and there was hooters down at the shipyards and places blew their hooters, and the church bells rang, which again I don't think they were allowed to ring during the war. I might be wrong about that, but I know there was a special appeal for the end of the war, and of course the parents decided to give us all a street party. In the photo it was miraculous how it all appeared. There was flags and paper hats, and people managed to get things from somewhere. I don't know how they did, and we did have a good party.
Everybody was happy. I was left school by then. I was working in a factory, King's. I was making uniforms, khaki, and well, everybody was happy, dancing, singing.
Exhilarating, because everybody was, you know, thrilled to bits, and dancing and singing in the streets, and there was dancing all over Sunderland, and of course all over the country actually. But in the park where that Winter Gardens was bombed, they were dancing there because the site had been cleared, they say then, and anywhere and everywhere they were able to dance. You know, they were doing just that, and parties galore, like, you know.
It's been about 11 or 12, I think. I can remember a lot of ships, sirens sounding late at night, very late at night. But I wasn't living in Brumer Street then. I'd had to go and stay with some relatives over Furwell. And I can remember the ship sirens going, and somebody saying the war's finished, the war's finished. And people were coming out and just having a look around, and I think there was searchlights going, and the Jewish ones were trying to get the enemy planes.
Well, it'd be, 11 and a half, 12. Well, there was an announcement that in Sunderland on a certain night, I think it was probably before the end of the war, but getting near, when the danger of air raids had passed, that the street lighting was going to be restored to normal, and all the shops could have their windows illuminated. And I asked my father, and he said, yes, I'll take you to town to see the street lighting, couldn't having remembered seeing it before. So we got the bus into Bedford Street in those days, and came out and walked right up High Street along Crowtree Road and down Homeside, along Forster Street, and I couldn't believe it. All the light, and the town was crowded, and everyone was laughing and shouting, and people over the road, you were waving at them. Well, you couldn't have seen them the night before, you know, you wouldn't have seen them. And the shops, many of the shops had their lights on, and I just hadn't seen anything like that before. I couldn't remember anyway from before the war, and that was such a revelation. It was a really exciting night. It doesn't sound much, but it was a very exciting night.
When the war officially ended, I remember all the sirens going off, ship sirens going off in the town, and a lot of people lighting bonfires. And I can remember we were walking around the town. I ended up at Deptford. It was a big fire. There was just a big recreation ground there, and there were big fire, and it was about 1 o'clock when I got back.
We had sing-songs, you know, Rule Britannia and all the things. There was a good comradeship then. In the air raid shelters, we had a good air raid shelter that my dad had built, and it was under a rockery. And I used to get people come in with us, and we used to have sing-songs, and I thought that was great.
Although the war in Europe had ended, British forces were still fighting the Japanese in the Far East. This would go on until August 1945.